Hello and welcome to RASM's Engage Forum, where we take 15 to 20 minutes to discuss a hot topic in the real estate industry. I'm Paul Chase, RASM Chief Executive Officer. Today, we are excited to welcome a special guest, Laura Gazigo, Associate Counsel for the Massachusetts Association of Realtors, whom will be presenting information on the new home inspection regulation. If we have other members watching in the forum today, as we do, I encourage you to ask questions along the way, if you have any. And if we don't have any questions or the live viewers kind of drop off, no worries. This forum is being recorded and it will be available on the on-demand library of the RASM website at rasm.realtor. So with that, let's get started. I now welcome Laura. Laura, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have
Sure.
a presentation prepared just to help me in my uh, discussion of the new home inspection laws and regulations. So thank you for that welcome. And again, I'm here to talk to you guys about the home inspection laws and regulations that have taken effect today, October 15th, 2025. All right. So, what exactly is this law? In short, I like to think about it as securing the right of a buyer to conduct a home inspection if they so wish, and it removes the ability to waive or negotiate away that right before entering into a contract. So, you can think about the law into two simple concepts. The first being that a seller has to provide the buyer with this required disclosure that notifies them of their right. And second, the buyer has an unwaivable right to inspect the property. So this first component, the required disclosure, what is it exactly? So this is the Massachusetts mandatory residential home inspection disclosure. It's a state issued form that has to be completed before the contract to purchase. And in it, you'll find that it reiterates basically what the regulation says, and that being that a sale is not contingent on uh, on a waiver of a home inspection. The buyer may choose to have the home inspected, and if they do so, the buyer shall have a reasonable time to conduct that inspection. So the law puts the onus on the seller or the seller's agent to have this disclosure provided to the seller and have them completed to the seller before accepting a contract to purchase. And failure to do that can not only be seen as a violation of 93A, but it can also get you in trouble with the Board of Real Estate Brokers and salesperson on a license law violation. So it's an important disclosure, and I'll talk more about it and how to go about it in my forms section of this presentation. The second component is a buyer's right to inspect. So this right grants the buyer the opportunity to use a Massachusetts licensed home inspector, and it must be a Massachusetts licensed home inspector. That's what the right guarantees, and have that inspector inspect their residential building. Like I said earlier, the buyers don't have to have an inspection, but this can only be waived after they have had acceptance of their offer, not before. So the inspection, as defined in the regulation, can only be conducted by a Massachusetts licensed home inspector, and it's a very limited scope. The definition is very limited in scope. It only covers the observing of the physical conditions of systems and components that are readily accessible and observable. So that's the roofing, exterior, electrical, plumbing, structure, heating and cooling, general interior condition, and insulation. So any observable safety hazards are covered in the scope of a home inspection definition, but this does not include intrusive testing such as foundation core sampling. That's something that the buyer and seller can negotiate upon outside this home inspection law and regulation, since it's not again covered in that limited definition of a home inspection. What's not allowed under this law is any type of activity that would render a home inspection meaningless. So that type of activity is prohibited. This can look like blocking a buyer's access to the property, whether it's the whole property, partial property, that would render a home inspection meaningless since the buyer doesn't have the ability to get a full picture of the property that they're buying. And another way that a home inspection can be rendered meaningless is by requiring a impossibly short period of time to have this inspection conducted. So 2 days may be enough. In some transactions, two days may be too much in some transactions. So that reasonable amount of time is going to look a little bit differently depending on the circumstances of your transaction. I got a little bit ahead of myself, but the buyer and seller, under this law and regulations, the buyer and seller are allowed to negotiate and agree upon, again, a reasonable period of time for the buyer to complete the inspection. And this reasonable period of time has to be enough time that the buyer can, one, schedule and conduct an inspection, have enough time to review the results of that inspection, and determine whether or not they're satisfied by the inspection. Like I said again before, that reasonable amount of time is going to look differently for each transaction, and the specific factors of each transaction will help one understand whether it's reasonable or not. So you want to look at factors such as access to the property. Is there people already living in there? Is it an empty property? And also availability of home inspectors in the area. How easy is it to get a home inspection scheduled, and what's the typical turnaround time for that region? That's going to help the parties understand if the proposed reasonable period of time is essentially reasonable for that transaction. And then secondly, the buyer and the seller can agree upon a reasonable threshold cost of repairs that has to be met in order for the buyer's home inspection contingency to be triggered and for the buyer to have the ability to walk away. And then lastly, it's not up on the screen, but as I was stating earlier, the parties can also negotiate and agree upon additional inspections that go beyond the legal definition of a home inspection. So this looks like tests and inspections of pests, radon, soundproofing, soils, well water, maybe having engineering experts or environmental experts come out to the property. That's something that the parties are able to agree and negotiate upon in that offer, since again it's outside that legal definition of a home inspection. And then there are a few residential purchases and transactions that are excluded from the law and regulations, meaning that in these transactions, the seller or the seller's agent isn't mandated or isn't required to provide the disclosure, and the buyer is able to waive that right to a home inspection before um, even talking about the contract to purchase. So these transactions include transactions that are specifically for estate planning purposes, foreclosure transfers, and sales that are to relatives or so relatives whether by blood, adoption, or marriage. And also sales that are part of a divorce proceeding where one ex-spouse is selling to the other ex-spouse. So these are really short arm transactions where the property is being moved from one person to another entity, but it's really um, staying within like that family unit sort of thing. And then the last exclusion is for new constructions. This is a little mouthy, but I'll explain in a bit. So the exclusion is applies to new construction where the contract is entered into before substantial completion of the construction and where the seller provides an express written warranty for at least a year. So in new constructions where they either just got started or there's not enough there on the land to inspect, that's going to be excluded from this new law and regulations. But where the we have a new construction where it is there's enough there to inspect where it's basically almost completed, that's not going to be excluded from the transaction. So you want to think about if there's not really enough there to even look at, then it's excluded and the buyer can waive their right to an inspection um, before getting into that contract to purchase. But if there's enough there where it's either deemed fit enough for people to live in, or they have walls, they have everything inside, they have everything there, but a certificate of occupancy has yet to be issued, that would not be included in the exclusion. So I like to think about it like if there's nothing there to even look at, nothing there to see, that it's included in the exclusion. But if there's enough there where people can walk through, go inside and see what's going on with the constructing, then it's not included in the exclusion and the buyer still has that right to a home inspection. And then before I get into the forms, I just want to reiterate that the MAR Forms Content Advisory Committee did revise three forms. That includes the contract to purchase, the purchase and sale, and then we have a new contract called the Post-Contract Termination of Inspection Rights Addendum. So that should be available in whatever platform you use to access the MAR library. And then you'll also see the state issue disclosure along there as well. But the one thing that you want to remember as you're going through with this law is just to be reasonable, be fair. The buyer has this right to inspect. So you want to go into each transaction assuming that the buyer is going to inspect their property until they've signed away that right. So before they sign it away, they still have the right to inspect, and it can't be taken away. It's not your job to sway them one way or the other. Just reiterate what the law says and what right they have. So moving on to the forms, I'll start again with the state issued disclosure. So again, the responsibility is solely on the listing agent to provide the buyer with this state issued disclosure. Failure to comply with this, again, will result in 93A violations and also violations of licensing law. And you don't want to be in a 93A claim. Not only is that going to be time consuming, but it's also going to be extremely costly. Not only would you, if you end up losing, would you be responsible for attorney's fees and costs, but you could also face triple the damages in that situation. So for best practice, I recommend, if you're the listing agent, to print out or download this document, sign it, have the seller sign it, and then just upload it to MLS. That way all prospective buyers have access to it and can, again, sign it themselves and deliver it before or alongside their contract to purchase. And that way everybody's in compliance and there's no possibility of you facing any kind of 93A or licensing law violations. And again, I just want to reiterate that this form has to be completed before an offer is accepted. Don't accept any offers if you don't have this disclosure signed. So in cases where you might find yourself as the buyer's agent and the listing does not include this disclosure, I would recommend to just download it from the internet, have your buyer sign it, and send it alongside it before you send your contract. That way, it's on them to have the seller and the seller's agent sign it, and you've done your job as a buyer's agent, making sure that the buyer is in compliance with the law and regulations. Now, moving on to the contract to purchase 501. So the main changes, are really the only changes that were made, was in paragraph, I want to say 7, paragraph 7, the home inspection contingency. And you'll see that it looks pretty much almost similar, at least in the first few lines of the first paragraph. Not only does that first paragraph allow the buyer to go ahead and do a state-defined and protected home inspection, but it also allows them to include additional inspections that are usually customary in situations where buyers are included. So that again is going to be pest, radon, water testing, energy deficient, energy efficiency matters. The paragraph goes on to list a few other kinds of tests and inspections, but it also makes it clear that the buyer is entitled to do additional tests and inspections that's not enumerated in that list. So if the buyer is interested in doing additional testing that's not included in that list, they can just go ahead and add it in the additional terms section of the contract to purchase. And say refer to paragraph 6. And then again, moving down a little bit towards the end of that first paragraph, you will see that it gives the buyer an opportunity to put in a date. And again, this date must be a reasonable time frame to conduct the inspection. It's going to be on the buyer to see to first put in that date that provides them with enough time to conduct the home inspection. And again, what's reasonable is going to look different given each transaction, depending on the transaction. So there's no real definition of what a reasonable time period is at the moment. Um, and then moving down towards the first two bullets, you'll see it states that if the results are not satisfactory to the buyer, it gives the buyer two options on how they want to deal with this contingency. The first option allows the buyer to provide that if the results of the home inspections are not satisfactory to them and in their sole discretions, then they have the right to terminate the offer. The second option allows the buyer to indicate a threshold amount of estimated repairs identified during the inspection that has to be exceeded in order for them to back out of the transaction. So this has to be a reasonable amount of time, and it can't be so high as to render the home inspection contingency meaningless. It has to be an amount that the buyer is comfortable having to spend if there are identified issues that are illuminated through the home inspection. And then the third paragraph is the same as the prior old the old inspections. It just allows the buyer to have until 5 p.m. on the following day of the date identified above to decide whether or not to notify the seller whether they will withdraw from the transaction. And then the fourth paragraph again just reiterates that the buyer has this right to conduct the inspection. And if they do choose to later terminate, they can't bring any claims on the seller, the listing broker, or the buyer broker for issues that would have been illuminated with the home inspection. And then the last line again just reiterates that this is in accordance to the home inspection regulations. And then also, it's not up here on the slideshow, but in the contract to purchase, in the new revised contract to purchase, I'd also advise you to review paragraph 9, the representations and acknowledgements paragraph. This again just acknowledges that the buyer received the required disclosure, and it indicates that the date they set forth here in paragraph 7 is enough time is a reasonable opportunity for them to conduct a home inspection. So again, it just makes them rethink and confirm that that date is enough time for them. And then I will not be putting up the purchase and sale agreement form 503 because the changes are exactly the same as to the contract to purchase. It's just going to be in paragraph 16 of the purchase and sales agreement. So that's the inspection and survey paragraph. And you'll see that it looks just, again, identical to what is in the contract to purchase. All right, and then moving on to the last form, the post-contract termination of inspection rights addendum. This is Form 523. It was previously just the waiver of inspection rights addendum, but it's been revised to comply with the new law and regulations. And this can be used for buyers who ultimately don't want to exercise their right to a home inspection after they've entered into a contract with the seller. So it really is just a tool that memorializes the buyer's acknowledgement that a home inspection is recommended, that they're aware that they have a right to a home inspection, and that they understand they may not have recourse for unknown conditions that could have been discovered with a home inspection. This tool also has the buyer agree that they were not influenced to make this decision, nor did they indicate they intended to do so at the time they made their offer. It further has the buyer agree to release the broker from claims arising out of any unknown conditions affecting the property that a home inspection could have revealed. So again, it just makes them think through their rights and to think if this is what they want to do before signing away that right to a home inspection and waiving it. And that is it for my presentation. If you guys have any questions, feel free to contact the legal hotline via phone or email, and we can answer your specific questions via live. Um, if anybody on the current Zoom has any questions, I'd love to take that.
Okay. So I don't see anybody with any questions. But yes, again, using the legal hotline is certainly a member benefit that we encourage all of our members to use, especially in these types of situations, so that way they better understand their specific needs.
Mhm. We love talking
Okay.
to you guys, so
Yeah.
please call.
Sure thing. Well, that's all the time for. Oh, is there a question? Okay, hold on one second. Let me get back over here under the chat. Let me see. Are we allowed to still include for informational purposes on an offer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You are, yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you. Okay. So there we go. Well, that's all the time for today's episode. Special thanks to Laura, the Associate Counsel for the Massachusetts Association of Realtors, for all her expertise in this information. To view other past Engage forums, please go to rasm.realtor and search from over 50 episodes for more important real estate and industry information. And we thank you for joining us today and have a wonderful day.